A dining room. What? What is this?
What is it?
Blood. Jill, see if you can find any other clues. I'll be examining this. Hope this is not Chris's blood.
Did I scare you? Happy Halloween! It's the best day of the year. It's like Goth Christmas, but instead of worrying about what you gotta get your grandma, you get to disappoint your parents instead. Halloween is one of the most nostalgic days of the year for me, and sometimes on days that it isn't Halloween, I wish it was. The treats, the frights and horror, and funneling money into multi-billion-dollar corporations for licensed costumes and accessories within a temple to hell constructed in the rotting corpse of a company driven to extinction by the very corporations you feed. Or instead of doing that, I could find a suitably nostalgic game to play. But what's the most nostalgic Halloween game? Oh hey, perfect. When someone says that they're a fan of horror games, Resident Evil is almost always at the top of that list. The birthplace of modern survival horror, and the gut-wrenching dash through zombie dog-infested hallways because you are out of ammunition. Spawning a massive multimedia franchise, we've got sequels, we've got spin-off games, we've got toys and statues and collectibles, we got comic books, we got book books, we got movies, and television shows. This game is undoubtedly one of the greats, but what makes it so nostalgic? Released in 1996 in Japan under the name Biohazard, the game was originally envisioned as a remake of producer Takuro Fujiwara's game Sweet Home, an RPG survival puzzle solver he made for the Famicom back in 1989. With an emphasis on resource management and puzzle solving, Resident Evil incorporated a level of cinematic horror that no game up to that point had even attempted. I mean, just look at this. Citizen Kane, using those fixed camera angles to mimic cinematic shots and fully voiced cutscenes added to the cinematic production value the game had. Hammy voice acting aside. Fun fact, all the live-action full-motion video scenes in this game were filmed in Japan using American actors. They had to ADR and dub over the rest of the game, and the Japanese developers didn't realize how cheesy the American voices sounded. This absolutely revolutionized the way people thought about games and redefined what a video game could be. This wasn't about a high score or getting farther than you did in your past 3 lives. This game was about instilling fear and suspense in its audience while slowly revealing its narrative to you. Now, as with all good art, I don't think there is one definite reason why Resident Evil stands out among its peers in the history of gaming. The unique blend of new ideas in the industry at the time, the primal emotion and the brutal difficulty led to some amazing and memorable experiences with this game that has cemented it in the hearts and minds of gamers across the globe. Now, to me, there are 4 main reasons that when blended together make Resident Evil so profound. The first of which being the story of a haunted house. So simple, it's classic and easy to understand. You're in a haunted mansion, there are zombies in there trying to kill you, and you gotta get out. But Resident Evil introduces a level of subtlety, nuance, and mystery into the formula that video games really hadn't seen before its time. You're a handful of cops sent to investigate some disappearances near Raccoon Forest. Into the process of investigating, you're attacked by zombie dogs. You escape the zombie dogs by locking yourself into this nearby mansion, and unfortunately for you, that mansion is full of zombies and various other creatures of the night. It's so simple and elegant, and that is all you need to understand to enjoy the game. But through 3D interactive storytelling, there is so much more to the story. Through journals, item placement, and level design, the game slowly reveals the mystery of the Umbrella Corporation and their journey to try and create superhumans. Tough shit, you get zombies. The fact that its narrative is so easily digested at face value widens the appeal and initial satisfaction of Resident Evil, but it offers more. dropping leads and little inklings of more story for those who are interested. This is one of the best ways a franchise like Resident Evil could have started out. The barrier to entry is super low, but with rewards so high for those passionate enough to seek it out. And that adds a level of satisfaction and accomplishment to Resident Evil that a lot of games really miss. Now, the second point is atmosphere.
Atmosphere!
Now, atmosphere can mean a lot of things, but in Resident Evil, it's an atmosphere of terror. A lot of horror games you think of resort to jump scares and shocking, gruesome imagery to scare their audience. But not Resident Evil. It's more subtle than that. Yes, there are zombies and some kind of creepy looking things, but nothing shown on screen is really horrifying. I mean, it's the PS1. It's polygons. Resident Evil incorporates that fear into every other aspect of the game. The quiet, droning soundtrack almost feels peaceful, lulling you into this false sense of security, but with just enough dissonance to let you know something isn't quite right. The beautifully pre-rendered backgrounds have a level of detail almost unparalleled in the PS1 era. With that muted color palette and dark surroundings, the visuals, however dated, are still impressive to this day. I hate that word, dated. Like, what does that even mean? Just because something looks older doesn't inherently devalue it. I use that word neutrally, not as an insult. Because at the end of the day, I would much rather look at something like this for hours on end than this. Talk about horror. I also think the hammy dialogue and weird live-action cutscenes add to that atmosphere. They are straight out of a B-movie with horrible line delivery and ADR. And I think atmosphere blends a little bit into the next point. Mechanics. The actual gameplay of Resident Evil isn't very action heavy. In fact, it's quite slow and at times very, very clunky. Every time you want to shoot something, you have to stop, ready your gun, and then shoot. And the movement, often referred to as tank controls, is really imprecise and leaves you handicapped. Pressing forward on the D-pad moves your character towards whichever direction they're facing. Backwards, you moonwalk, and left and right pivot your character. Now, Resident Evil came out just a few months before Super Mario 64, which really standardized the 3D gaming experience. So I can't really dock it for trying to incorporate the third dimension when really the gold standard hadn't been invented yet. But I actually prefer these tank controls when playing Resident Evil 1 because I think it adds to the overall experience. Having those fixed camera angles, like I mentioned, can make things a bit disorienting when transitioning from one angle to another. You want your character to keep moving forward towards the direction that they are facing, so it makes sense in the grand scheme of things, but it definitely adds quite a bit of a learning curve. You have to learn to play with this handicap, and it often leads to some very stressful situations. Say you're stuck at a wall and there's an advancing zombie coming towards you. You're all out of bullets and you don't want to try to kill it with your knife because you're definitely going to get bit a few times. You try to run past him, but you're just a hair off and you run into the wall, slowing you down and ultimately getting you chomped. It can be a very frustrating experience, but it adds to the atmosphere of horror. Paired with the fixed camera angles that often hide things from your view, you are left feeling unprepared and lacking control. You are thrown into an unfamiliar and disorienting environment, just like Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield are in the game. These controls are integral to the feeling of Resident Evil, and in subsequent re-releases and remakes, they have modified the controls a little bit, and I don't know, I just still prefer those tank controls. It's something everybody remembers about the game. Without that whack-ass movement, it just wouldn't be as nostalgic. On top of the restricted movement and camera angles, you have a severely restricted inventory space. You are forced to manage your resources by storing items in boxes to save space in your very, very limited backpack. You also have to stay on top of how much ammo you have because there is only so much within the mansion. And you also have to manage your ink ribbons. This is an item found in the mansion that you use to save your game. And there are only a fixed amount of them in the game. That's even considering you find them all. This adds a level of suspense and dread to the simple act of saving your game, which traditionally is a massive relief in other games. Every choice must be calculated, from movement to inventory space to saving. But by far, the most important aspect of Resident Evil in my mind is the Spencer Mansion itself. Now you can argue that this should belong in atmosphere or game mechanics, but it's my analysis video and I say it deserves its own spot. On top of the survival horror aspect of the game, there is also a heavy emphasis on exploration and adventure game type puzzle solving. You come across locked doors that you have to find keys for in other parts of the mansion. You find areas that you can't quite access and you have to push something aside, or you have to select paintings in a certain order. Now, this form of puzzle solving naturally leads to a lot of backtracking similar to a lot of Metroidvania-style games. But it isn't for nothing. You become intimately familiar with the Spencer Mansion, and by extension, the game itself. Ask any longtime Resident Evil fan, and I bet that they can draw you a map of the Spencer Mansion from memory. And if that isn't nostalgia, I don't know what is. There's something about knowing a game's map and world so intimately that, I don't know, makes you feel connected to the game. It makes you feel connected to the people who created it, connected to the story, and by extension, connected to all of the other fans of the franchise. Level design and world building is one of the most important and fundamental aspects of game design, and Resident Evil 1 is a masterclass in both of those things. Resident Evil is the perfect mix of survival horror, adventure, puzzle solving, and immersive atmosphere. I didn't grow up playing this game. In fact, I never played the first one until I started working at Nostalgic. I'd only ever played the Resident Evil 2 Remastered, and that was a totally different experience. There are very few games that stick with me and have me thinking about them when I'm at work or school or driving to my apartment, but Resident Evil was one of those. I was always thinking about the Spencer Mansion, where new items can be, where I need to go to get to the next part. And I didn't want to use any sort of tutorial or walkthrough because I wanted to experience it for myself. It led to a very unique gaming experience, and really not many other games have affected me in the same way. This original version even holds up after 26 years of being released. And then there's the GameCube remake, and then later the remake on like everything else. And to many people, that GameCube version is the definitive version of the first Resident Evil. It adds so much to the visuals, the graphics, the storytelling, and the narrative itself. But I don't know, there's something about the PS1 version. The music, the atmosphere, the hammy dialogue. That's where my heart lies. And this game absolutely deserves its place among the nostalgic archives. Your wife?
Yeah, my wife and kids, they always wait up for me. Even, today, my oldest daughter. I'm sorry.
Don't worry about that. I know the most nostalgic video game is out there somewhere.